from a U.S. district judge over here in Manhattan, forcing New York City to put an end to a successful anti-crime initiative or put a layer of supervision to stop and frisk. While critics say the program promotes racial profiling, supporters say it's helped bring crime down dramatically. That's a fact. So is it just a necessary evil to keep Americans safe? Does it skirt the Constitution? Here to discuss this, Professor of Constitutional Law at Florida International University, Elizabeth Price Foley, and the City of Chicago Treasurer Stephanie Neely, who wrote the op-ed "Stop and Frisk: A Needed Reality." First off, let's go to you, Ms. Foley. Elizabeth, where do you stand on this?
Well, you know, clearly, I think the judge is overreaching here. It's kind of the worst possible case of judicial activism. What she's essentially done is place the entire NYPD under receivership based on incredibly flimsy evidence of what she called indirect racial profiling, which, by the way, doesn't exist as a theoretical matter and certainly didn't exist on this particular record.
Right, and when you talk about what exactly she's in support of and what she's not in support of, she doesn't take into account the improvements, and she cites the disproportional impact theory of equal protection. Is that something, Stephanie, that you would actually buy into?
You know, I think I'm only concerned about getting guns off of the streets, and I think there's a huge difference between racial profiling and stop and frisk. My understanding, and I'm not an expert on the law, but my understanding on stop and frisk is you go into high crime areas and you get guns off of the street. If you're in Chicago and you stop someone on Michigan Avenue where there isn't any crime, especially no murders, then that is racial profiling. But I believe stop and frisk has been successful, and I think that the judge is focused on implementation and not actually stop and frisk directly.
The implementation of it in a way that they say that there's got to be now a layer, I believe, Elizabeth, there's got to be a layer now of supervision, almost an advocate for would-be criminals before they could actually go after somebody on the street, which could hinder the whole success the stop and frisk has had.
That's right. And look, you know, this has never happened before in the history of this country. And let's make a couple things clear. The judge based her decision on two constitutional provisions. One is the Fourth Amendment, which prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures. And the second is the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. And let me tell you, stop and frisk has been upheld as a perfectly constitutional measure since 1968. And you may recall that 1968 was the height of the Warren Court era, which was the most liberal Supreme Court in this country's history. In fact, Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote the opinion for the court called Terry versus Ohio in 1968 that upheld stop and frisk. Right. And he was joined by Thurgood Marshall, who was the first African-American to serve on the Supreme Court and an ardent civil rights supporter. So there's absolutely nothing in terms of a Fourth Amendment violation for having a stop and frisk policy. And in terms of the Equal Protection Clause, let me say this. The judge based her entire equal protection decision, this indirect racial profiling conclusion, on statistical evidence. And she must have missed that particular week in her constitutional law class, because the Supreme Court has made abundantly clear since the 1970s that you can't have an equal protection violation based on statistical evidence like this alone. And
Stephanie, look at these stats in terms of success. You cannot doubt what has happened in New York City. It's flat out a law enforcement miracle. Murders are down 27%, robberies are down 8%, shooting incidents down almost 30%. And look at what's happening in your city of Chicago. You're a third of the size of New York, and you have triple the murders.
You know, I agree, and that's why I was a proponent and still am a believer in stop and frisk. In Chicago, we have black on black, brown on brown crime. The high crime areas, we need to get the guns off of the street. I believe this is an effective way. I obviously do not want police officers abusing their power, but I do want to get these guns off of the street. When I wrote my op-ed, a lot of people disagreed with me, saying that we're targeting young African-American or young Latino men. And I said, but they're the ones doing the killing of us. And so unless we come up with another solution, then I think this is a great option for us, because the statistics do not lie.
Well, by the way, just so you know, a very reasonable argument. This gets kicked up to a higher court now. So far, if the judge just looks out her window since 1990, she could see the success. In her area of Brooklyn, the 76th precinct, there were 13 murders in 1990, 571 robberies. In 2012, no murders, 114 robberies. Something's working. Success didn't figure into that decision. But thanks so much to both of you for coming out today. Elizabeth Foley and Stephanie Neely. Have a good day.
Thanks very much.